Good afternoon, everyone. From the Seattle Convention Center, this is Amazon Business Reshape. I'm Ari Shapiro. And you all look nothing like what I imagined either. Welcome back to the main stage for this final session, which I am so excited about. I was really thrilled to get the invitation to host this event because it offered me an opportunity to use my reporting skills to dig into something that is already reshaping our lives in more ways than I can count. So, for the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you some of what I have learned in my research, and then we are going to bring out this panel of incredible, brilliant experts who I know are going to help us all see how AI can transform all of our organizations when we leave here. So, I want to start with a multiple choice question, and I will tell you there is a correct answer, and ChatGPT will not tell you what it is. The choices are A, onion rings, B, tater tots, or C, curly fries. Choose one. Raise your hand if you choose A, onion rings. Okay, hands down. Raise your hand if you choose B, tater tots. Good showing. Raise your hand if you choose C, curly fries. Wow. Well, I knew this was a room full of smart people. Congratulations to those of you who chose curly fries, because researchers from Cambridge University did a study showing that people who like curly fries on Facebook have a higher IQ than average. Why? They don't know. And ultimately, it does not matter. The law scholar Paul Ohm said this back in 2012. We are embarking on the age of the impossible to understand reason, when marketers will know which style of shoe to advertise to us online based on the type of fruit we most often eat for breakfast. Or when the police know which group in a public park is most likely to do mischief based on the way they do their hair or how far from one another they walk. Well, if Paul Ohm said that in 2012, that we were embarking on that age, then today we are so deeply immersed in it. Just last month, the Nobel Prize in Economics went to 3 men whose research shows how creative destruction and technological breakthroughs, including AI, can raise the standard of living for people around the world. And the signs that we are living in this age can pop up in very unexpected ways. Like, a friend of mine recently shared something with me that I frankly found puzzling. He said when he ordered food on Uber Eats, the default tip settings that he got were different from his wife's. His tip settings were suggestions of 17, 20, or 23%. His wife got 13, 15, or 17%. I didn't know why that would be. Sexism, maybe, I thought. Well, fortunately, my friend who told me this story happens to be the CEO of a company called Luminous AI, a platform that provides governance and testing for artificial intelligence systems. His name is Andrew Burt. So, Andrew solved the puzzle. He knew that Uber Eats had used AI-embedded data analytics to conclude that Andrew was wealthier than his wife, Claudia. Unclear whether this was because he liked curly fries on Facebook or because of some other reason. But the result was that the app was defaulting to higher tip options for him than for his wife. A similar news story this summer caused a huge headache for Delta Airlines. Delta announced in July that they were going to use AI to set 20% of their ticket prices by the end of the year. And this caused a huge outcry, a massive blowback. People assumed that Delta was going to use their internet search history or their zip code to determine how much they would pay to fly on the airline. And the reaction was so intense that some Democratic lawmakers proposed a law. They called it the Stop AI Price Gouging and Wage Fixing Act. And when they rolled out this bill, they didn't just call out airlines. The legislation also said it would prohibit practices like a ride-share app paying a driver less after seeing that she visited a pawn shop. Or, and this one really struck me, it would prohibit nurses being paid differently based on an algorithmically manipulated bidding war, not the tasks they perform. Who in this room wants their blood drawn by the nurse who placed the lowest bid? So far, that bill has not gone anywhere, but Delta had to reassure customers that while it is using AI to set prices based on factors like weather and demand, it is not basing fares on individuals' personal information. I would take the liberty of tacking one word onto that statement, which is yet. The New York Times once reported on how the company Target used tracking technology to assign what they called a pregnancy score to customers. This is a likelihood that they're pregnant because new parents spend a lot of money and Target wanted to lock them in as customers. And it turns out that people who've recently learned that they're pregnant tend to buy things like unscented lotion, calcium and magnesium supplements. So, according to this article, one day a man shows up outside of a Target store in Minneapolis. He's furious. He demands to speak to a manager. The manager shows up. He waves this flyer in the manager's face and he says, "My daughter is still in high school and you are sending her coupons for baby clothes and cribs. Are you trying to encourage her to get pregnant?" So the manager apologizes, says he had no idea what this was about, but he saw that the flyer was addressed to the daughter. It had ads for maternity clothes, nursery furniture, pictures of smiling babies. He said he would look into it and get back to the man. So a few days later, the Target manager calls the parent, apologizes, and the father, embarrassed, said, "I had a talk with my daughter. Turns out there's been some activities in my house that I was unaware of. She's due in August." That story came out 13 years ago, which is a lifetime in the history of artificial intelligence. Back then, the pregnancy score was created by human statisticians. Those data analytics are vastly more sophisticated today, which points to something really important that I want you to take away from this story, which is that the best use of AI, whether you are looking at customer analytics or pricing or procurement, the best use is augmenting human insight, knowledge, productivity. You can make decisions faster. You can see patterns that you might otherwise miss. The best use of AI in your business is not to replace human ability, it is to enhance it. So instead of thinking of this as AI, artificial intelligence, you could think of it as IA, intelligence augmentation. I'll give you an example from my time at NPR. Like most news organizations, NPR is very cautious about using AI in journalism. It is important that news reports on NPR be generated by humans, not by chatbots. But NPR is more than a newsroom. It is a company. And All Things Considered, the show that I hosted for a decade, is a company staffed by dozens of people who work 7 days a week on different day shifts, rotating through different roles, editor, producer, director, etc. And everyone has their own preferences on staff. Some actually prefer to work weekends. The news is a little bit slower. Some prefer a later shift so they can send their kids off to school in the morning. And every month on All Things Considered, one manager has to put together that month's schedule. Every month, the schedule comes out, and people grumble that their preferences were ignored, or they point out that there was a day when a manager had assigned 2 producers and no director, which would make the show impossible to put on the air. And then the manager would spend time reworking the schedule, time that he could have spent on journalism. That task is ideally suited for AI. It augments the human's ability to do an existing task rather than imagining something entirely new. Here's another example. While I spent the last decade in Washington, D.C., hosting All Things Considered, my brother Dan spent the last decade here in the other Washington, inventing a device called the Glowforge and running this company. The Glowforge is a desktop laser cutter. It carves designs into leather, metal, wood. It's very popular with the Etsy crafty crowd. And my brother Dan confessed something to me the other day, that even though he studied engineering at Harvey Mudd, even though he spent his entire career working in tech, he never learned how to code. And then one day he was playing with some AI tools, and he had this moment. And he said it was sort of like the scene in The Matrix where Keanu Reeves opens his eyes, looks at Lawrence Fishburne, and says, "I know Kung Fu." Suddenly, thanks to this AI tool, my brother Dan could code. Tasks that used to take weeks might take an hour. One of the founders of OpenAI called this vibe coding. You can ask AI to build you a website, and it might not be instantly ready for public consumption, but it gets you a great distance to your destination. By the way, Dan has now scaled back his role at Glowforge to focus on AI consulting through Wharton Business School. I find these stories fascinating, but I also find it very slippery to answer the specific question, how can AI improve my business today? Because any statement about AI that is true today may be obsolete tomorrow. These technologies are evolving and improving faster than we can comprehend. I want to share with you a sentence that I think is worth remembering. This is the worst it will ever be. That is to say, AI will never be as clunky, as limited, as bad as it is right now, which makes it tough to wrap your head around what artificial intelligence means for your business operations or customer service or design, since they are all transforming at such incredible speed. For reasons that are beyond me, the all-knowing social media algorithm recently resurfaced an interview I did in 2023 with the great TV writer David Simon. He created The Wire and other incredible shows. This was during the Hollywood writers' strike, and one of the sticking points in the strike was the use of AI in writers' rooms. David Simon was one of the negotiators. He was an AI absolutist. And in this interview that has lately been making the rounds again, I said to David Simon, what if you're trying to transition from scene 5 to scene 6 and you're stuck with that transition? You can imagine plugging that portion of the script into a generative AI model and saying, hey, give me 10 ideas for how to transition this. The great writer David Simon replied, I'd rather put a gun in my mouth, which is a very David Simon thing to say. I do not believe that AI can do a better job at writing a scene than David Simon can. I do not believe that it can do a better job at running your business than you can. These technologies are tools, they're not panaceas. There's no one right answer about how to use them. But I will go out on a limb and say that there is a wrong approach, which is, I'd rather put a gun in my mouth. As an interviewer, I try to approach every conversation I have with curiosity and with openness. I want to know what I can learn from someone, but I don't necessarily trust whatever they tell me. I don't turn around and put what they say on the air unless I have fact-checked it, verified it, contextualized it in a meaningful way. And I think those are good principles for our use of AI too. Okay, I want to tell you one final story before I bring out our panel that kind of contradicts what I said about AI augmenting human abilities, but I still want to share it with you because I just think it's totally cool. The national security expert Paul Shary helped write the Pentagon's policy on AI. And he wrote a book a couple years ago called Four Battlegrounds, which opens with the description of a simulated dogfight that the US military did. Two planes fighting in midair. One has a human pilot, the other an AI pilot. This is a simulation, remember. The AI faced off against the top fighter pilots in the US military. And the AI crushed the human every single time. The human pilots did not get off a single shot against the AI. And here's where it gets really interesting. It's not just that the AI did what the human pilots did better. The AI actually deployed techniques that no human can do. I want you to picture two planes flying at each other at high speed like a game of chicken. There's like a fraction of a second where you can get a shot off before the two planes collide in midair. This is a move that no human could ever do. It is just too dangerous. But 1/100th of a second is long enough for the AI pilot to get the shot. That's a big enough window for the AI to do what it needed to do. So, just as a thought experiment, what is your version of the nose-to-nose lethal shot? When you leave here, you could go back to your office and brainstorm a list of all the things you already do that AI could help you do better, like scheduling the staff of All Things Considered every month. That is a good and valuable exercise. But you could also ask yourself and your colleagues, or for that matter, ask Claude or Grok or ChatGPT, what are some of the things this technology could enable us to do that were impossible before? And if that question doesn't motivate you, I can frame it in a slightly different way, which is, if you continue to run your business using only the equivalent of human fighter pilots, how long will it be until your competitor comes flying at you nose to nose and fires a lethal shot right at the cockpit of your business? There are companies that survived the internet revolution of the 1990s without ever having a website, without having any kind of digital presence at all. And those companies were very lucky. And as we are in the midst of this AI revolution, as you are assessing whether you can afford not to engage with these new technologies, then the question I would ask you is, how lucky do you feel? Well, now it's my honor to introduce three incredible panelists to discuss some of these issues. These are experts at the front lines of AI innovation and its impacts from individual businesses to global macroeconomic trends. First, you've already met global economist Rebecca Patterson earlier today, as well as Brenda Spoonemore. And finally, Taimoor Rashid is joining us. Taimoor leads AWS's JI Innovation Center. Please help me welcome them back to the main stage, Rebecca, Brenda, and Taimoor. Hi, welcome back. Welcome, Taimoor.
Thank you.
Okay, before we get into how best to use AI, I want to begin by speaking to what I think is one of the elephants in the room, which is there are so many stories about whether we are in an AI bubble right now. And I'm not even entirely sure what AI bubble means, whether it's startups being overvalued or whether it's the question of whether AI will do everything that it promises. Rebecca, will you begin by just telling us whether you think there is a bubble and whether you think that question should even matter to the folks in this room?
Sure. So I worked at a hedge fund for several years called Bridgewater Associates, and we like to build models to understand everything in the world. So, of course, we built a bubble model. And there were a couple things we found historically, talking about history rhyming, that you tended to see over and over again when you had a bubble, whether we're talking about tulips or .com. So first is valuation. And from that metric, I would say check. So if you look at cyclically adjusted price earnings ratios, what people call the Cape-Shiller ratio, it's above 40. We've only been above that level once in 100 years, and guess when that was? 99. All right, so valuations high, very high. Second would be concentration. So usually in bubbles, you see a concentration of investments people are making, they're all buying the same thing. You see a concentration of activity. And again, there I would say, check.
Yeah.
So I wrote it down because there was no way I was gonna remember these numbers correctly, so forgive me, but I'm just gonna rattle these off. So as of right now, roughly 40 firms, so the bigger AI-related companies, and I'm just talking about the US, 75% of the S&P's return over the last, since ChatGPT was launched, 75% of the return was 40 companies. 80% of the earnings growth over that period was 40 companies. 90% of the capital spending growth in the country was 40 companies. So concentration, check. I'd say where it's not clear to me yet, we have a bubble, would be two areas. One is leverage. Usually when you have a bubble, people start borrowing like crazy to speculate on the tulips or the .coms or whatever they're speculating on. Now, I think one of the reasons the market has gotten a little squishy in the last few weeks is because there has been more media reports, more articles, just raising questions about some of the debt vehicles that some of these companies are using. They're borrowing money to invest in their future innovation instead of just relying on free cash flow. So that's gotten some people thinking, oh my God, this feels like 2007, 2008, where you had a lot of leverage in the system, particularly in the housing market. It doesn't mean we're there yet. And then the final thing, real quick, is leverage, profitability, duh. So .com, I mean, we all think of pets.com. More of the companies, not all, but more of the companies today are profitable. So when I think about are we in a bubble or not, I'd say there are reasons to think we might be. Does it check every box and the bubble's going to pop tomorrow? Probably not, but it's really hard to time these things.
Brenda and Tim, or should that matter to the people in this room?
No. it does
Explain.
not. And having lived through the first bubble, so Rebecca is much better qualified than I am to talk about the leverage and the market and where things are headed, and all that's, I think, true. However, from a business standpoint, there's no bubble in the transformation, right? And that was true even the first time around, right? So if you set aside valuations and assets and leverage and acquisition, what I'm most focused on as a business leader and a partner to lots of folks in this room is the underlying transformative technology and how we think about that. And there's no bubble there. That's real. We see it now, and Taimur's probably much better qualified to talk about some of the things we're doing at AWS, but it is a real business transformation, and that's not overblown at all, I don't think.
So let's get to what that transformation looks like. I described the I know Kung Fu moment. Taimur, have you had one of those in your work at AWS?
Yeah, great question. I mean, we have had a number of, I know Kung Fu moments. And what's really inspiring is actually seeing customers react that way as well, too, right? So in the Innovation Center, which we started about a couple of years ago at AWS, the whole premise was, how can we accelerate the business value that customers get through adopting AI, whether it's generative AI or whether it's even agentic AI? And by the way, the last I checked, the world economy is powered by classic machine learning today. I mean, if we look at fraud detection, we look at product recommendations, and all these very ML-based workloads, it is powering the world economy today. In helping customers from just about every industry, whether it's financial services, healthcare, life sciences, even working very closely with state and local institutions, we are seeing customers get value from their early works with GenAI. And this can be efficiency improvements that they're getting in productivity. And we're talking about anywhere from 20 to 40% productivity on specific tasks. This is just the beginning of that cycle. And when we look at agentic AI, you take it even a step further. Now we can actually look at business process, business workflows, those things that traditionally power the value chain of industries. We can get very targeted with what I like to call modularized intelligence. That's effectively what agents are. You're taking intelligence, you're modularizing it, and you're embedding it into existing workflows. But the I know Kung Fu moment is when you can look at your business in a whole different way. It's not about bringing the technology to the existing business. It's about reinventing a whole new business, a whole new category of work, which is, I think, just the early start of it.
Brenda, what does that look like? As you talk to customers, as you talk to some of the people in this room, what have you heard? Tell us a story.
Well, actually, I'd love to roll back to Shelley's keynote yesterday, because there's a couple of sort of joint solutions across AB and AWS that we announced. And the one that was sort of my I know Kung Fu moment, not that I know Kung Fu, was it's a utility solution. And to be perfectly honest, the first time I saw the description of the solution in writing, seemed okay. But then when the team sort of walked me through it, so imagine you're a power line utility. And maybe there's a storm, or maybe there's accelerated growth, right? That might mean that you have to do repairs on power lines, but you don't know where, right? You've got hundreds of miles of power lines, and the stringing together, that the redefinition of the problem space is now you have a remote drone, air drone, that's using LiDAR and radar to determine where the overgrowth or where the repairs might be needed. That information is then sent back, which allows them to both dispatch crews in an efficient way, like a labor-efficient way, and source the products that they need to make the repairs on the spot. And I think what the challenge for us was, you talked a little bit about redefining the problem spaces, like, we have AB here and we have AWS here, and then there's obviously a lot of different sectors, but redefining an end-to-end solution requires us to think across all of those and use AI to redefine that whole problem space.
Taimur, you mentioned the difference between generative and agentic AI. I know that's sort of the moment we are in. Rebecca, how do you see that changing the macroeconomic landscape as we undergo that shift?
Yeah, so I want to answer that, tying it back to the first question you asked me. So we will see the stock market fall 10%, probably this year or next year. 10% drawdowns for the S&P happen every other year, like clockwork. We've already had one this year, almost 20% after Liberation Day. So if the bubble deflates slightly, 10%, even 20%, it shouldn't throw you off your plan, making the strategic investments. Now, .com in 2008, those were 50% sell-offs in stock markets. They were a lot more painful. Could that happen again? Maybe, but I think it's less likely without the leverage building. So so that's the bubble specific, but then the strategic investment, the quick evolutions you talked about in your opening comments, Ari, those are continuing. And the more we see those, and the more companies are putting those to use, the more productivity growth we see. So a bubble is going to destroy wealth bursting is going to destroy wealth for a period of time. You will have job losses for a period of time. That's part of a typical economic cycle. It's not the fun part, but it happens. But the strategic investments building productivity are going to help support growth coming through that.
And Tamar and Brenda, how do you see this shift from generative to agentic AI playing out at the ground level in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, we see this already where customers have started off with generative AI, and it's really AI augmenting the human being, right? And so whether it's AI-assisted coding or whether it's AI assisting, frontline workers in sales and marketing, with agentic right now, as I mentioned earlier, is that you can target the business process. And you can get this level of hyper-automation at large numbers with agentic AI. But it's going to be a journey to get there, right? Because if generative AI had this theme of the art of the possible, I had executives reaching out to me saying, hey, Timur, we've identified 500 use cases for generative AI. I'm like, wait, that's way too much. And so there's an overfitting exercise that generative AI has done. What agentic AI will do for us is the art of permissibility. What is actually permissible for an agent to do? And that's where we're going to start right-sizing the application of agentic AI to our workflows.
So that points to the question of how do you prioritize? Like when AI can do so many different things, when it is changing the world in so many different ways, Brenda, what would you tell the people in this room about where to focus their energies?
Well, weirdly, I'd flip it, and it's let humans be humans. Let humans do the things that humans are really good at, right? Which is relationships. We were talking a bit early about humans still have more context. We haven't yet built out the context, which doesn't mean we won't get there. But there are places where humans have context that we haven't fully loaded in models. And so it's a little bit like, where do we point it? What's the decision space? How do we redefine what those are? And for us, it's the things people don't enjoy doing, right? So it's process improvement, efficiency, better targeting, and let
Making
humans
the schedule for the All Things Considered staff.
I used to work at the NBA. The schedule for 82 NBA games for 30 teams with host sites, very difficult.
Yeah.
There was a guy, Matt Winnick was the guy. Hopefully, they have already moved to a new process for that. But really, if you can move into agentic solutions or technology solutions for those, then it lets humans be humans and do the things we're good at, which is building relationships and getting a bit deeper on the problem solving.
Tamar, how do you think of the question of prioritizing? When it can do so many things, where do you put your focus? Where do you put your energy?
I think you go back to what I like to say, business fundamentals. Look at your expenses, look at your growth areas, and say, it's not a question of what can we do. It's what should we do knowing that we can get intelligence acceleration, right? And I always go back to business fundamentals, which is, are you focused on the bottom line? Or are you focused on the top line? And then get very targeted and just going each layer deeper and saying, how can we take CapEx and address that? This is one great example that we have an Australian bank. They came to us and said, hey, look, we have a CapEx goal that we're trying to go target. We have a business lending process which takes way too long, and there are way too many people that are part of that process. How do we reduce all of this? That was the starting point. Eventually, what it came out to was 6 specialized agents that we created to take business lending from 30 days to 15 days, and from 3 people to 1 person.
So I hear you both saying, prioritize what humans don't like doing, what AI is good at, the things that are already burdensome. How much value do all 3 of you place in the idea of the moonshot, of the AI fighter pilot executing a maneuver that no human pilot could do, and whatever the version of that people in this room might come up with? Is that worth people's time?
I absolutely think it is. I mean, I think you have to look at your portfolio of AI projects and say, how much are geared towards top line and bottom line? And then looking at and saying, how can we completely reinvent how we do things? And those are the moonshot ideas, which maybe you take 10 to 15% of your time and your budget and allocate it towards that. It is almost an opportunity not to pass, to think about the moonshots.
I think that's right. If I could just, and I think of it, it's a portfolio of where we spend our time, right? Because you need a couple moonshots. You also need a couple there. If there's painful process improvement that's lower hanging fruit, you should do those things, right? It's an and, not an or. And thinking about the portfolio of our intellectual energy and technical resources, you have to have bets in a couple of those places moving at the same time.
Rebecca, as you look at the global economic landscape, do you see countries that are investing more and leaning more into AI performing in markedly different ways from those that are not?
Yeah, we already are. I mean, it's still early days, relatively speaking, but the International Monetary Fund has put out something called the AI Preparedness Index, and it's tracking different metrics by country to see which countries are better able and more willing to invest in AI and get the productivity benefits. They're taken as a given. The good news for a lot of us in this room is that the US is one of the leads. One of the countries at the bottom of the list right now is India, which was very surprising to me. And I don't know if that's just dissemination of the technology around the country or having the hyperscalers or is clearly there's a lot of great engineers and coders in India. So it's interesting. But yes, to your question, we are seeing a differentiation already. And there's a lot of concerns about this, that you could have greater global inequality between the winners and the losers in the coming years, depending on who can both move fast on AI and deploy it at scale.
I feel like this might be self-evident, but it is worth stating almost as like a thesis statement. Why are the countries that are investing more in AI, why are the businesses that are investing more in AI expected to perform better than those that do not?
I mean, there's such a neat mosaic of things that has allowed the US to be where it is. We have the deepest and broadest capital markets in the world. So if you have a great AI idea and you want to do a startup, you can borrow money from a bank. But if the credit cycle's in a bad place and the banks don't want to give you a lot of money, you can go to private debt, you can go to private equity, venture capital, angel investors. There's corporate debt. There's so many ways to borrow money and grow. There's obviously a culture of innovation. There's great secondary education, so we churn a lot of really smart young people. Historically, at least, hopefully still in the future, we bring in a lot of talented immigrants to this country that also contribute. So there's, I think, a number of factors, a culture where failure is fine, right? So all of these things together allow us to just hit the ground running with this stuff. China has a lot of those things as well, but then you look at a place like Germany, amazing engineers, good schools, but they don't have the capital markets. Something like 80% of loans in Germany come from banks. So if the banks are saying no thank you, you don't have anywhere else to go to grow.
Yeah.
And then you can't grow across the countries, you can't scale. So the US is somewhat unique in the world with our ability to tap into this, that a lot of countries, they know they can get there, but the politics makes it very hard for them to get it done.
Tamar and Brenda, I'm sure that there are some people in the room today who are thinking to themselves, AI is scary, AI is not for me, I'm not sure I want to mess with that for whatever reasons. Do you think that creates obstacles to running your business? Does it exclude you from having a business future? Like, how dangerous is AI? We could have an entirely different panel conversation about how dangerous is AI, but I'm gonna ask a slightly different question. How dangerous is AI skepticism to a business leader in this moment, in your view?
I think the lack of curiosity would be a real barrier, for sure. I mean, it's not like, you said something about failure, Rebecca, and I think that's really important, which is, if we're striving for the perfect solutions or the end state, we're not. This is going to be iterative. And the way I think of it is like, AI is a contact sport. You got to kind of get in there and learn and figure out what works and what doesn't work and be really curious about it. Because what we're finding is until you do that, you don't know how to define the problem space,
Right.
right?
Tamor, what would you say to somebody in the room who's like, AI is not
Yeah.
for me?
Oh, I would say, I mean, look, we face a lot of reluctance from customers about, hey, AI space is evolving so fast. Why should I invest in learning this model when it's going to be very different, right? And the analogy that I give to customers is that AI is kind of like how Mozart's was when he was 5 years old, right? There was a lot of potential, but you didn't know that he was going to create the magic flute until he went through that iterative process of creating music.
Okay, but to extend the analogy, you could imagine somebody saying, I don't need to go to a concert of Mozart's music when he's 5. I'll wait till he writes the magic flute.
Well, you miss out on the experience. And we have a
The
saying,
problem is
actually.
you are Mozart.
It's a
In
very
this
good
case,
thing.
you are
Oh, in this case, you are Mozart.
You
Okay,
are
got it.
Mozart.
You are Mozart. And I would say this, that there's a saying, Andy Jassy references this a lot, that there's no compression algorithm for experience. And it is the experience that you learn. It's like
Will
the
you
same-
just explain what that expression means if anyone...
what that means is that you have to go through the motion and get the experience in doing something. You can't compress that by just learning like the Cliff Notes, for example,
Yeah.
right? And so it's very important in AI. You're actually building the muscle, you're building the terminology, you're getting familiar with that cycle of what it takes to take intelligence and then infuse it in applications. And that in itself is part of the journey.
How do each of the three of you think AI is going to change the way you do your jobs in, I can give you a 1, 2, or 5 year horizon. Take your pick.
I have no idea where we'll be in 5 years. I keep thinking about like my phone today, which is an extraordinary thing. And 10 years ago, I was on my, what were they called? I'm losing my
BlackBerry?
mind. BlackBerry, thank you.
Yeah.
And before that, we had Palm Pilots.
Oh, I remember those.
Right?
Yeah.
And Palm Pilots were awesome.
Somebody told my husband to invest in Palm Pilot.
But they sucked compared to Blackberries, and those sucked compared to our phones.
Yeah.
So when you ask me 5 years from now,
So 1 year. What do you think 1 year?
I'm using AI daily as my research assistant primarily. I would expect 2 years from now, it'll not just be a tool that makes me more efficient with my day-to-day work. I would expect within 2 years, I'm going to have some personalized agent or agents that actually can do stop to finish tasks for me. So efficiency, but I think there's the potential that it'll also help change the way I do things and think about things.
Brenda, Tamor, what do you each think AI is
They're
going
going
to
to have better
about?
answers.
Well, I mean, we already see this in effect right now happening today in the Innovation Center. My whole thing with the Innovation Center was we need to move faster. We need to deliver for customers in a much faster way than we do it today. And we have to have smaller teams that do it. And so we actually have this mantra, which we started in the Innovation Center, which is live in 45.
Live
We want to
in
go
45?
live in 45. And we didn't specify days or
45,
seconds.
yeah. What's 45?
Minutes.
But we do 45 days. And so in 45 days, we should be able to go to a customer, build, deploy, and operate a GenAI solution.
Oh, wow.
Now, my team pushed back significantly on that. And I said, by the way, we only need 3 people to do that. And that was about 8 months ago. And today, we do live in 45.
Wow.
That is just our thing. Now we do, what can you do in 45 days? What can you prototype in 45 hours? What can you learn in 45 minutes? And what can you communicate in 45 seconds, right? And so it's become a mantra, which is now a mindset, which is now the way we do things, right? And so, and by the way, you're all happy to take that live in 45 and implement it in your business as well, too. We'd be
Brenda?
very happy to help you with that, too.
That's amazing.
Brenda, what do you think is going to be different? What will AI change in your work a year from now?
So I think the first, I'm actually going to say what's hard about it first.
Yeah,
And
great.
then I think reprogramming the software between our ears is the hardest part. Because I think what we're finding is like we're seeing, I don't know, I can put my data in and I can get a document from the team and I drop in AI and ask it questions. And I can start the conversation with, here are the 5 risks, here are the 3 one-way doors, and let's talk about that, right? So there's some like simple kind of process improvement, data and insights. Where my brain feels uncomfortable and stretched is redefining the end state solution in a way so that we're not just creating tools for parts of a process as it exists today, but actually thinking, is there a way to completely reinvent how we do something? And that's the part I can almost like physically feel it,
Yeah.
but really getting our brain state to that, because once we do that, then we completely change the problem.
It's not
space.
just efficiency or outsourcing.
It's not efficient. It's a complete
remodeling.
reinvention. And
Yeah.
then, and for us at Amazon, we have a process called working backwards, right? So we start with what the customer problem is, like what's the problem statement, what's the opportunity? And I think for us, really anchoring on that, so rather than here are the processes we need to make better, or here are the tools we can build, really anchoring on that problem statement and then saying, if I had a magic wand, I'd want to be able to, in 15 minutes, do X, Y, Z. And then you start to think, well, actually, there might be a way to do that, right? Because if we pointed at the data source and if we create an agentic interface, and so really rewiring,
Be the magic wand in some
rewiring
ways.
ourselves
Yeah.
to think about differently about how to solve those customer problems.
So you're saying figure out what your goal is,
100%.
and then like don't think about the process at all. Just think about what's my goal, and then brainstorm how do I go backwards to get it using agentic or generic.
I have realized that my phase one in this was looking at the process it is today and finding better tools and invention of those phases. But what I realized was, well, that's not the magic wand. That's actually not the step change innovation, which is, do we really understand like how we could completely transform something and like take all the pieces of the process away and then see how we can build towards that, because it might
That's
look
so
completely
exciting.
different.
I mean, you said
Very
this is the
exciting.
hard part, but this is a really
Oh yeah,
exciting
no,
part.
it's a good stretch. It's
Okay.
like you're at the gym and you're pushing it.
Yeah,
It's a good
building
stretch.
new muscles. Okay, so we're talking about this shift from generative to agentic AI, and I want to look even farther into the future because this week I learned a new term, which is polymathic artificial intelligence. I learned it from a Thomas Friedman column, and here's how he described what polymathic AI is. He said, a machine that was able to master physics, chemistry, biology, computer science, philosophy, Mozart, Shakespeare, and baseball better than any human could, and then reason across all those disciplines at a high-dimensional level, higher than a human ever could, to produce breakthrough insights that no human ever could. Thomas Friedman calls this a species-level turning point. What would that mean for everyone in this room?
I think a societal freakout. I mean, it could be amazing and unlocking, right?
Amazing.
Amazing.
I mean, curing diseases and clean energy breakthroughs,
Correct.
and also
But there's also
...
there's also humans who want to take care of themselves and their family, who would say, this is an existential threat to my livelihood and my being. And you could see pushback, lobby groups, a new political movement. I mean, nothing would surprise me. It's possible, especially if we're in that transition where there are some job losses as part of it.
Tamor?
You know, I think it's important not to miss the forest for the trees. So when I actually see that definition, I actually think back to myself that what Thomas Friedman is saying, that's a machine. But the reality is that is what the human being is. The human being already has that potential to do that. And so I think that's one important thing to realize is that let's not lose the power of the human element in doing all those things. It's just multiple human beings that have done that, right? And AI is always bounded by the fact that it's binary numbers, and we're not binary. So I say that just by just realizing the fact that to not be threatened by that,
Yeah.
it can be threatening, right?
So we'll roll you out to calm everyone down.
Yes.
Well, I mean,
I will calm everyone down, don't panic.
I think it's interesting that Tamor brings up the human element because if you don't mind my adding this, Rebecca, your background is in journalism. Your background is in literature and books and the liberal arts. And so that human touch is so deeply grounded in the careers that you've built. When you imagine this sort of superhuman brain power ability to cross all of these disciplines, what comes to mind for you, Brenda?
I mean, one of the things that comes to mind, and this is just a data point, reading fiction, there's evidence, there's data, that reading fiction creates empathy, right? And I think we were talking a little bit earlier, so I've got a high school junior who's very interested in STEM. He thinks he wants to go into bioorganic chemistry, and he does robotics. But a lot of the conversations we're having with him about how to prepare and what to do in college are, yes, he wants to go deep in technology, and he wants to go deep, but it is actually, it's history, it's literature, it's ethics, it's philosophy, because I still think, at this point, the human context engine has an empathy and a sense of mission and a humanity that I don't want to lose sight of. So I guess I'm not ready for the existential freak out either, but I do think a lot about how do we guide whether it's a college student or people that are new to our teams or even us rewiring our own brains in a way that best positions us to make the most of it, but also be really aware of what the impacts could be.
I love that the takeaway that I'm getting from this discussion is that on the one hand, we cannot afford to ignore AI, turn our backs on it, and recuse ourselves from it. And on the other hand, the essential human quality of thoughts that have our fingerprints on them will always be needed in some form or another. Am I overstating it?
I think you're spot on, yeah.
And I also think that to really scale the benefit of AI, understanding that humans are going to have some element of insecurity about this, to me, it emphasizes the need for companies using AI to think about trust and governance.
Talk more about that.
So if people who are using my bot don't trust that the information's correct, don't trust that my information is private, even though the company's telling me it is, maybe it isn't, you're never going to get the same amount of usage and scale. I think companies having AI governance committees, having processes, making those incredibly transparent can help build trust. But the faster people are adopting AI and the more that they're using it, I think it's going to be more important to keep them using it and to get companies to use it. If you say, no, we're thinking about all these things. We want to innovate, but we want to do it responsibly.
So that's the macro level. Thank you. To bring it back into the room, to the level of people sitting here with us, I framed it in terms of when I do an interview, I contextualize, I look for a second source, I verify, I find value in the interview, but I don't take it at face value.
Yeah.
What guidance would you offer to everyone here about getting your hands dirty without being led astray, to mix a metaphor?
I mean, it's skepticism and testing. I mean, it's really I don't think there's any sort of magic to it, but as you're talking, I was thinking about, all things considered and sort of in a way, you're doing lots of that. You're taking the empathy and the information and synthesizing and created a trusted source. It's the bot that Rebecca just mentioned, but like you were the human version of that. And so I think, you're welcome.
Thank you. Don't know much about baseball, but yeah.
You're good. But I think we still have that responsibility, which is to bring the synthesis and the skepticism. Like you can both lean in and learn and be part of developing something, but also have a healthy amount of skepticism. I mean, we've had interns that I adore that still need to be coached, right? Because that's our job, right? It's our job to teach, to coach, to make it better. And so, it's really about engaging, like it's not being afraid of, it's not being overly reliant upon, but it's figuring out how they serve kind of the business space, the problem spaces we want.
Yeah, this leads into two related questions that I want to bring up that I think are kind of the flip side of the big, ambitious, hopeful ideas we've been talking about. One, broadly, is what keeps you up at night, and two, more specifically, is what pitfalls do you think everyone here needs to look out for when they go back to their offices and try to implement some of what we've been talking about? Let's start with the big one. What keeps each of you up at night?
Well, I'll build on what Rebecca and Brenda said, is that I think doing this responsibly, right? I think the thing that keeps me up at night is making sure that whatever we're doing, we're not just doing it for a point in time productivity gain or some revenue growth, right? Because whatever we're laying down foundationally here is going to have second and third order effects down the road in the future, right? And so every day I sort of wake up saying, or I sometimes they'll go to sleep, is am I doing this responsibly?
You have so much power.
We do, and with great power comes responsibility, right? As they say. What's helped me and the way I guide my teams is look at yourself as a steward, right? And when you look at it,
steward.
That you have a responsibility, that you're a caretaker of whatever you're doing, and whatever decisions you make is going to influence things down the road. It changes the calculus for how you start making decisions, right? And so I think that's the thing that keeps me up at night.
Rebecca, what keeps you up at night?
Two things I'd point out. One is this transition period, which I'm kind of hopeful it's going to be relatively compressed, but you are going to have a period.
Sorry, when you say transition period.
I mean for the labor market. So as companies are investing in AI, looking to control costs, it's not that AI replaces all these workers, but that the personnel cuts could offset some of the investment happening.
Yeah.
So there's a period where people might be losing jobs to a degree and blaming AI. And then you could get the societal backlash and perhaps politicians reacting too far by like, no, we're going to slow it down or pause it or do
So
something.
you're really looking at dominoes that could fall.
So I worry about that. And then the other thing that keeps me up at night are the bad actors, and they're always going to be there. It's just reality. But AI gives them a tool to do even worse stuff. And I have a story I can tell at a bar later about some of the cyber attacks and how they've gotten just absolutely diabolical. Anyway, I'm not going there. What gives me hope is that there are a lot of really great people, both on the private and public sector side, who are coming together, understanding these risks and saying, how do we stay in front of it? So in the US, the AI Safety Institute, which was formed under the Department of Commerce a few years ago, it's evolved a little in the current administration, but it still exists. And it's getting the private sector and the government to talk to each other so the government at least is aware of what's happening. And then different countries are coming together and sharing what they're learning and doing and collaborating because they know if they don't, there's a greater risk that a bad actor could do something. And so the fact that you have both private sector, public sector, and across the world, basically, coming together and sharing and trying to make sure they prevent the bad actor,
I find that reassuring.
it doesn't guarantee that we don't have a bad outcome, but it's very reassuring to me.
Brenda?
I think I largely what Tamar said sort of resonates with me a bit, but I would say it's also, I mean, because it's speed and ethics and, but it's also how we coach our teams, how we run our organizations to do that at scale.
Yeah.
Right, because ultimately each of us individually could have that sort of set of values, but in order to move at the speed of business and at the speed of innovation, we need to create cultures that allow us to do that and sort of federate that invention. And so thinking about how we quickly are very innovative and yet, responsible and have sort of, we think about tenants at Amazon a lot, about sort of guardrails, but how do we do that so that we can move quickly enough, but still kind of hit that right standard?
Yeah, being stewards without being overly precious, maybe.
Exactly, or stifling innovation, right? Because you've now, Timber doesn't want to sign off on everything his team is doing, but he wants to be able to set guardrails that they can run with it, right? And come up with new inventions and new technologies.
Right. And so then, to bring it from what keeps you up at night to what pitfalls would you warn everyone in this room to be aware of? Do you want to get specific?
I mean, I think I said a version of it earlier, but it's not a spectator sport. I mean, this is not something where you can just sort of sit on the sidelines and wait for someone to hand you the solution. I mean, we talked about being stewards, we talked about testing and failing, and I think, the extent to which people here are curious, and not just about solutions within your own workplace, but, we've had some great conversations here this week about industry-wide innovations and, giving us feedback about, what we should build and talking with peer sets. I think, you have to be involved. Like, you have to have those conversations. You can't just wait and be a recipient. So I think the biggest pitfall is sitting on the sidelines.
Oh, that's interesting.
I 100% agree. I think, there's things we can do for our workflows, for our organizations, and then as individuals, it's like learning a new language. We all need to try to do what we can to be fluent. And that could be, watching videos, it could be taking online courses, reading books, listening to talks, and then using it every day in whatever way that makes sense for your role.
Yeah.
I mean, it got me comfortable with it. It helps me understand the risks. It helps me understand the opportunities. It helps me have more intelligent conversations about it. And all that comfort helps you not have the existential freak out.
I'm so fascinated that you think the biggest pitfall that everyone in this room should be aware of is sitting on the sidelines. Tamar?
I agree
where
with
do you
that
come down on
100%.
this?
And I would say that,
Do you think the end of the world is?
The biggest pitfall.
Sorry to interrupt.
no problem at all. I would say participate, and everyone should participate because the teams are going to see how and what their leaders do, right, and what they say. And that's why we as a leadership team are very hands-on with the work that we do. And so we do our own vibe coding, even though my vibe coding is not that great. But when people see that I'm using the tool, then they get incentivized to use the tool as well too. So I think going back to your point, you just have to participate and don't sit on the sidelines, be part of it.
So in the last 5 minutes, of the last panel of this incredible conference that has presented so many big ideas and so many sprawling, fascinating paths to follow, what do you want everyone in this room to take home with them?
I would say three things. I think the first thing is um, confidence, I think, is so important, right? And I say that because you'll see so many things in the market. You'll see a lot of promise, a lot of pessimism as well too. People sharing doomsday story about what AI can do for us. And I think it's now important as the leaders to have that confidence, right? And
Do you mean confidence in our ability to use AI wisely, or do you mean confidence that AI will lead us in a positive direction? Specify what you mean by
in all those
confidence.
aspects, right, is that the potential of what AI can be, and what it can do for not only our businesses but then us as individuals as well too, right? I think it's very important to do that. I think confidence in being able to say that AI can really transform the way we do business, right? Part of the challenge that I see is that when people experiment with AI and then they just sort of realize that kung fu moment, they're a little scared to go take it all the way because they're just unsure of what's to come. And I think that's where confidence is needed.
And what does take it all the way mean in that context?
Take it all the way, like scaling it across the organization, right? It's like being comfortable with that everyone knows kung fu now, right?
Everyone knows kung fu now. That's a great sentence.
Yes, yeah. And so I think it's really important to have that confidence to be able to say, hey, we're gonna embrace it and we're gonna go all the way with it, right? We're gonna make AI part of how we do software development, how we do PR, how we do all those business functions, right?
Well, I also think, if I may, that what I know kung fu looks like is different in the media and communications department from in the customer service, from the supply chain. Like, these may all have their own breakthroughs, but they may look nothing like each other within the same company.
Exactly, I agree, yeah. And then and this is the unique thing about it is the way AI is being used in these different departments. There are nuances that as each of these departments share what they're learning, you have this collective wisdom that's coming from the different teams, right? And so the way we see software developers use AI and the way we see it in the front line with marketing teams, there's a lot of cross-pollination that can happen between that. So I would say confidence, I would say culture, keeping in mind that as we adopt AI, we are changing the way we work. And that is going to be a cultural thing. And so there's a thing that we used to say at AWS, which is architecture influences culture and culture influences architecture. And the architecture is AI native. That is the thing that, we had cloud native, we're in AI native phase right now where how we do things is going to be really driven by AI, right? And so that's going to influence culture.
Can I
Brenda, did you
jump
want-
on
yeah,
that? Because
jump in. Yeah.
you talked a little bit about sort of, I think, the marketing team and the
Yeah.
organization also influences. And one of the things that I would be worried about is like if architecture influences that ultimate outcome, so does organization. And some of these solutions span the normal departmental boundaries. And so if we're thinking just within how to make the, I don't know, the marketing department more efficient and in a separate way than sales in a separate way from, I don't know, each other group, we're going to completely miss the boat. Because what you're going to end up doing is creating these little submodules that actually aren't doing the reinvention. So architecture, I would just take also to organizational architecture,
Yeah.
because I think that's what helps us think bigger about what that ultimate solution could be.
So keep running with that, and what's the takeaway that you want to send everyone in this room home with?
I mean, I would just circle back to that. So that uncomfortable space for me, which is, we talked a little bit about working backwards from the customer problem, being a way to really start with a clean slate and think much bigger about what's possible.
Yeah.
And so, I would just say it's yes, experiment with Gen AI and get your hands dirty and, learn and be curious, but really getting yourself to step back far enough to define the ultimate problem is what's going to help us realize the real value of some of these technologies, as opposed to just creating system-level
Incremental,
optimizations.
Yeah. Okay, the last word, the big picture. Rebecca, what do you want to send us all home with?
So I guess two thoughts. One, I would just repeat my point on governance and I think getting adoption, building trust with it, both with your customers and with your employees, they need to trust what's happening, and that means transparency and more communication than you think is necessary, probably, and perhaps some sort of governance ethics code, whatever that looks like for your company.
Interesting. You think I mean, NPR has an AI ethics code. We're journalism I still say we. NPR is a journalism operation. You think most companies that adopt AI should have an AI ethics code?
Either an ethics code or a governance committee, something that can help say, what is our culture vis-a-vis AI? And then what are we using it for? What are we not using it for? What do we promise our customers and our employees, whether it's with privacy or usage, data, et cetera? Checking the skepticism, because I think that builds trust, which builds adoption. My other point, my last point would just be going back to the very beginning, the stock market goes up and down. It's going to go down at some point, but that doesn't mean that it should be a distraction from anything else that was said here. This is a historic moment we're living through, and this is an opportunity to reduce structural costs of doing business, to change the whole business model. And so while you need to prepare your organization to navigate the ups and downs, that's one thing. Don't let that take you away from this other thing.
Well, I think about when the dot-com bubble burst. It wasn't the end of the internet.
No.
It didn't mean people should walk away from the World Wide Web,
Right.
as we then called it. It's so exciting to be at the brink of this new era with all of you, and especially with the three of you. Thank you so much for helping me understand it. It's really been a pleasure talking with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
It was a
much.
pleasure.
Thanks.
And thank you all for coming.